In the century following the Mongols' vengeful attack on Moscow, Dmitry Donskoy's son and grandson clung to the Rus throne. Amid old rivalries and fragile alliances, Dmitry's great-grandson Ivan III set out to consolidate Moscow's control over all the Rus. But one independent republic would not yield to Moscow, the wealthy commercial center of Novgorod. While Ivan III consolidated Moscow's power, the Golden Horde was succumbing to discord. Seizing on this weakness, Ivan withheld tribute, equipped his men with firearms, and marched to meet the army of the Khan. On the banks of the Ugra River, the Rus stood defiant, prepared to contest over 200 years of Mongol dominance. From long, harsh winters to Mongol invasions, life for Muscovite peasants was tough. But they had one crop that was vital to their survival: rye. Moscow peasants relied on cereal crops more than any other food. To separate the grain from the straw, cereals had to be threshed with a flail. This tool could also be repurposed for battle.
When the Grand Prince called upon peasants to serve in the army, they would have become armed with their tools of the trade, their pitchforks and their pikes, but chief amongst their weapons would be the flail.
Farming crops in a land that was covered in snow for 6 months of the year was challenging. But rye was one crop that was particularly adapted to the extreme Moscow climate.
The thing about rye is it's incredibly hardy. If you can sow it in autumn, it'll grow through the winter months, even with a covering of snow on the ground. Now, Russia is famous for its long, cold winters, but it also gets very hot and dry summers, and it's in those drought conditions that rye also thrives. And it's for that reason that a majority of Moscow peasants were growing this stuff.
But they didn't get to keep all of their crop. The largest rye grains were given to the Grand Princes as tax, while the rest would be used to make bread, or malted to make a nourishing, non-alcoholic drink, kvass.
It's super easy to make and cheap, really cheap. It's great for helping tired muscles recover, and it's just quite refreshing, and also helps control infections.
Muscovite soldiers drank kvass as part of their daily rations. It's made by first adding ground malted rye to boiling water. After cooling, yeast culture is added, causing the mixture to ferment. This kills off any germs in the water.
There you go.
Around 3 days later, the kvass is ready to drink.
The bubbles are really starting to come up now.
Yeah.
Just the yeast doing its work. На здоровье.
На здоровье. What are the special qualities of this drink then?
It's essentially a probiotic drink. It has a lot of B vitamins, and it has lactic acid, which is great for recovering from hard labor. It's kind of an ideal sports drink, really.
And with rye so easy to grow, you can see how this was the sort of saviour, if you like, of the Moscow peasantry.
The hardiness and versatility of rye was a lifesaver to Muscovites, both for peasants at home and soldiers on campaign. In 1480, Moscow's army, led by Ivan III, faced off against the Mongols across the banks of the Ugra River. But the Muscovites, armed with guns, were too much for the Mongol army. When the Mongols realized reinforcements weren't coming, they retreated. Now Ivan III was free to pursue his ambitions to expand Moscow even further. Despite the rapid rise of Moscow, it was still a vassal of the Mongol Empire. But after the stand at the Ugra River, Ivan III's ongoing refusal to pay tribute antagonized the Mongols. Yet, retribution never came. Cracks had developed in the highest levels of Mongol rule, and the Golden Horde shattered into smaller khanates, beset by infighting. So Moscow was left free to expand. Ivan III continued taking control of smaller Rus principalities by any means necessary. Some had been ruled for over 100 years by an historic enemy, Lithuania. Ivan III was determined to take them back. By 1500, he had turned Moscow into more than just a city or a state. It was an entity that he claimed represented all the Rus people. Ivan's successor, Vasily III, would fight to take back the lands from Lithuania that he believed belonged to Moscow. Streltsy is the Russian word for shooters. And from the late 15th century, the armies of Moscow had included regular troops, armed with an arquebus, a standard firearm in all European armies at the time.
This is an arquebus. It's an early type of musket. To load it, you put a charge of black powder down the barrel. The ammunition is a lead ball.
A paper wad seals the charge.
Then both ball and wad are rammed home tight.
To shoot the gun, priming powder is placed in the pan.
The priming is lit by a match. Now, a match was originally a length of cord soaked in saltpeter, so that it burns slowly but continuously, and even in poor weather.
When lit, this sends a flame through a small hole at the base of the barrel, which lights the main charge. One of the great advantages of the arquebus was that the ammunition was inexpensive and easy to make. Molten lead was poured into a special mold. It cooled to a solid state in seconds, making it possible for vast quantities of lead balls to be produced. They were finished by trimming off the excess lead, which was known as a sprue. Streltsy received regular payment of both money and bread, and they lived with their families in purpose-built settlements called slobody. Streltsy were a new type of army, ordinary troops recruited from tradespeople and farm workers.
An early arquebus had an extremely heavy barrel.
To shoot it with accuracy, the gun had to be steadied, and Streltsy had a unique solution.
This is a type of axe called a bardiche, and for the Streltsy, it doubled as a gun rest.
Arquebus men were usually vulnerable to cavalry.
Even with experience, reloading takes time. And cavalry covers ground very speedily. Once you've shot, your position becomes perilous very, very quickly. However, with the scything power of a bardiche, a Streltsy has at least the chance to withstand the cavalry onslaught. It took a brave cavalryman to ride into a hail of bullets, but an even braver one to face the horror of these axes.
Over time, Moscow's armies recruited more and more men armed with guns. Inexpensive troops who changed the way war was waged. Ivan IV had broken through the walls of the ancient city of Kazan, and his army flooded the streets. They hunted down its defenders and their allies, and brutally sacked the city. Kazan had fallen to the unstoppable military might and strategic innovation of the Muscovite war machine. In the years that followed, Ivan IV waged war after war to bring vast new territories under Moscow's rule. By 1547, he had declared himself the first Tsar of all Russia. And his never-ending fight for territory set the course for those who ruled after him. Moscow was no longer a small fort on the banks of the Moskva River. It had survived centuries of Mongol oppression and wars with its neighbors. Its evolution from fort to city to state and to empire would continue. Moscow's rise transformed Russia into one of the world's greatest superpowers. Following Moscow's growth in the west, Ivan IV ascended the throne and took up the eastern expansion plans of his ancestors. The Tatar Khanate of Kazan lay just across the border. But the Tatars had resisted many Rus sieges in the past. In his final attempt to capture the Tatar lands, Ivan would deploy bold new strategies.